Let's bow our heads. Father, as we get into your word today, we ask for your guidance. Speak to us, really reveal your direction, your love for us through your word. And as we study, Lord, may we really leave with an assurance today that you are in charge, you have a plan, and that you have a plan for our lives. Is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. All right, so let's return to our screen today and let's get going. So last week we made a really good effort, I thought, to cover the seven seals and the servants before the throne of God, right? Which is chapter 7 of Revelation. However, there were a number of questions that came after the lesson, and a number of people came back with feedback that they were a little bit confused and they weren't sure about some of the items that we had established. So I thought today, before we leave these chapters to move on to chapters 8 and 9, which is our next stop, if you will, that we will do a final review. And for review today, I really I want to ask you to pay attention to the screen, because today what I'm hoping is that um, we can make some real progress, if you will, by following some charts that we have developed that hopefully will help us clarify how things are. All right. So what I will do is I will review. If you follow the screen, I'm just putting some marks. I will review the key points and the introduction to the seven seals. I will talk a little bit about the symbols and real life, and then we'll talk about the summary of the first six seals, which is what we wanted to discuss. And I want to go back to talk a little bit about the sequence of events using some charts, which we're going to use for the first time, and then we'll come off with the seventh seal. All right, so that's our focus. We won't we won't spend too much time on some of the stuff we've already covered, and I will come back to the saints before the throne, some of the slides as we need to explain certain things. So as always, feel free, if you will, to pose your questions as we go along, because we'll want to make sure that we understand what is being presented, if you will. And so as we go along, feel free to pose your questions and we'll take it. But I'll really move a little bit slow today, because I want to make sure that we kind of go over some of the key points that are important for understanding of the seven seals. And I kind of think this is important, if only to lay the groundwork for what is to come. So let's begin, if you will. Um, so we want to begin with some review of the key points. And again, we want to quickly establish that John is on the Isles of Patmos as a prisoner. He is there because the emperor is not happy with his role as a pastor of the churches in Asia Minor, in particular Ephesus, which was the main church on the western coast, but also some of the other churches along the way. He was the pastor of those seven churches that he wrote the seven messages to. And so because of that, John is placed in prison. He is old, he is frail, he is nearing 90 something years, if not 100. So it is not the strongest of apostles, but in his old age, in his weak state, and in his banished condition, he receives a visit from God. Isn't that great? And that is the real powerful thing, because today I want you to keep in mind that God loves his people. He loves humans. He loves those of us who have given our hearts over to him. And he will always look out for and protect his people, even when they experience times of trouble. I deliberately use that term for you, um, Adventists in the class, because I know that is a popular saying for you. So let's just keep following through and keep our minds open today, because we're covering some key points as we go forward. All right. So I want you to remember that John is experiencing persecution from the Roman authorities. He is placed on a solitary island. His physical being is protected. Yes, he is struggling for the normal luxuries of life, but he is preserved. He is kept on the island. He has food, he has clothing, he's getting the normal hygiene stuff as a prisoner. And on top of that, he's experiencing, because of his deep relationship with God, he's experiencing a conversation and a communication with his Lord and Savior. I want you to swallow that. I want that to sink in. I want you to appreciate that God looks out for his people, even though we may go through some tribulation in this life. God is still with us. But this is no surprise to you if you have been in this class from the days of Daniel, because you would remember that when the Daniel friends were thrown into a fiery furnace, even then God was with them and he protected them. My message to you is God has a plan, and that plan involves looking out and protecting his people. Whenever we talk about end time events and we study Revelation, we approach it with a level of apprehension and a kind of anxiety, because we feel that it is so much of doom and gloom, and we forget that we are serving a powerful, all omnipotent God who is able to see us through the eyes of a storm. Or Lord, our rock, in him we hide, a shelter in the time of storm. So I wanted to emphasize that the very origins of Revelation is re-emphasizing, if you will, God's ability to protect his church during times of trouble. We then came to the outline, if you will, of the book of Revelation. And I deliberately told you that there are two parts, right? So the first part is sort of a historical part, and it talks through the seven churches, the seven seals, the seven trumpets, and then we'll talk about a great controversy scene and some other conflicts. And then here we'll talk about the two witnesses, etc. But the second half of the book, if you will, is where we'll talk about seven plagues. We haven't gotten to that as yet. So don't kind of drive within your headlights. Don't reach to areas we haven't covered as yet. We'll talk about the fall of Babylon, whether that is ancient or modern. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about a period of 1,000 years, and then we'll talk about a New Jerusalem. So we'll get to that. And I know some of you are tempted to take whatever information you have from this part and juxtapose it onto this period here. But let's just take everything in time and assume that we will get to it one way or the other. So for today, we're really talking around the seven seals, and we're trying to understand what is taking place with respect to that. The outline in words, if you will, is similar to what we just discussed. My apologies. Yeah, the outline in words is similar to what we just discussed, which is an introduction. And then let's remember that there is a prophetic account of the church's history using the churches in John's time. So again, we have a history of the church, and I'll come to that in a bit, that came from the message to the seven churches. Then we have a more detailed account of the church's history that is given in Revelation 4:1 all the way to 11:19. Again, this is not unique, because we saw this in Daniel. In Daniel chapter 2, we had the metallic man that gave an outline of world history from Daniel's time all the way to the end of time. And then when we got to chapters 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and even 12, it was that we receive a lot more detail of the same time period. So that in Revelation, we are following a well-known script, if you will, in that from the messages to the seven churches, we begin to understand what God is saying, and then we get some more detail along the way. All right, so this is kind of what we would have discussed. Let's keep going. I want to kind of quickly, because all of this is revision for you. I want you to remember that as we get into the seven seals, we are taking it in the context of the history of the church as we learn from the seven seals. And therefore, it's important to realize that the history of the church was summarized, if you will, in a message to the seven churches of Asia Minor. And then it is further, and we have a more detailed view of that history in the vision of the seven seals. And we are yet to discuss the vision of the seven trumpets. Everybody okay with that so far? We have a history of the church from John's time all the way towards when Christ comes a second time in the messages to the seven churches. And then we have a more detailed view of that same historical period from John's time all the way to when Christ comes a second time in the vision of the seven seals and the seven trumpets. No surprises there. We study that this is a good representation, if you will, of the messages to the seven churches, covering from Ephesus around AD 31, which is when Christ died, all the way down to beyond 1844, which is the Laodicean period, which is very much akin to the Christian church today. A kind of feeling that we know a lot, but really not on fire for God, and God wants us to be on fire for Him. And He's making a personal appeal because He stands at our heart's door, Revelation 3:20, and He knocks because He wants to come in. And because of that, He is making personal appeals for us to turn to Him in our personal relationship with God. Everybody okay so far? And then we looked at Revelation 4 and 5, and in that we saw a vision of God upon His throne, the Father seated upon the throne. We saw Christ now having overcome and being resurrected from the earth. He returns to heaven. He's coronated, if you will, as the Son of God, having made the ultimate sacrifice for mankind by dying for us on the cross of Calvary. And now He is joining the Father on the throne, which is a lot of chapter 5, and He's able to open the seals, all right? And then when we get to chapter 7, we will be discussing the fact that other people, other saints are joining with God on the throne in heaven. Let's keep that in mind. So if we were to summarize, if you will, the seven seals, which is what we are discussing now, there's an introductory sanctuary scene, which we covered in chapters 4 to 5, which is really to say to us that before God tells us about the history of the church in a little bit more detail, He reinforces that He is still the God upon the throne. And I go back to my opening statement to you. John is assured that God is upon the throne, even though he is a prisoner on the Isles of Patmos. John is extremely happy with all the luxuries of this life because he knows that his God, his Christ, who he loves and he serves, is sitting upon the throne in heaven and looking out for him. All right? So after that introductory scene, we are then introduced to the first six seals in Revelation chapter 6, which covers 17 verses 1 to 17. And then there is an interlude. In other words, I want you to understand this, and we'll look at that in a little bit. When we are finished with verse 17 of chapter 6, we should have gone straight to chapter 8, verse 1, which is there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. But before Jesus goes from the sixth seal to the seventh seal, He pauses for a bit and He has an interlude. I like to think of an interlude as an advertisement. You know, sometimes you're watching your favorite show on TV and it's about to end, and there's a cliffhanger moment where the star boy or the star girl looks as if they're about to die, and they stop and they go to advertisement. And sometimes that advertisement is good enough because it reminds you it's a TV show you're watching and not reality. And you get a chance to say, all right, well, whenever I come back, I will see what happens. So there is an interlude, if you will, by God, and then He resumes the vision of the seals in chapter 8, verse 1. I want you to remember that because we'll come back and talk about it. What is the interlude? The interlude is really a scene of assignment and assurance. The assignment is to seal God's servants who are on the earth, seal them with the character of God. We'll come to that. And what is the assurance? The assurance is that he hears about 144,000 who are sealed and are able to withstand the effects of the last day, and he sees a great multitude in heaven. I hope you catch that. You caught what I just said, in that he hears that 144,000 are sealed, and then he sees a great multitude in heaven. If you didn't remember that, you could go to your Bible and check it. But today I plan to use some of the Bible text directly. So I'll come back to that in a bit. Everybody all right with that? We okay so far? We've made good progress, right? So we've covered the fact that John is a prisoner on an island where he doesn't have the luxuries of life. He is being persecuted by the governing power, which are the Romans in Asia Minor. But while he is persecuted, he is protected by God, and God communicates with him, and he serves God by faith. And then we introduce the seven seals, and we talk about the fact that there was an introductory sanctuary scene. There was a layout, a narrative that covered the first six seals. It was then interrupted after the sixth seal to give us a scene of assignment, the assignment being that God's people are sealed and the assurance that they will eventually be victorious. And then we return to the sequence of seals in chapter 8, verse 1, when the seventh seal is open. Everybody okay with that? I'm not going to get into the slides on Matthew 24, except to remind you that in Matthew 24, Jesus gave a very high-level summary about some of these same events when he talked about there will be a period of great tribulation, and then after the tribulation, there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and then Christ himself will come. If you go back and you spend some time reading Matthew 24, you begin to appreciate that it is indeed a very good high-level summary of what we are studying in the seven seals. All right, so when we got to the symbolism, the only thing I really want to remind you here is that as we study the seven seals, there is a healthy mix of metaphorical language and literal events description. And part of the art, when you study Bible and prophecy, we develop an art, we develop a sensitivity for how the Bible and the literary style of the Bible is structured. As we study, we need to be able to distinguish when we are talking metaphors and when we are talking descriptions of literal events. And that is something we just need to keep in our mind so far. But you okay with that? But you all right with that? All right. Any questions? You could put up in the Q&A or in the chat if you have any questions. And if you have it on YouTube, you can put it in the chat. All right. I want all that to soak in. So we've covered the fact. All I wanted to tell you here is that the symbolism seems to move between metaphorical, a metaphor, that something that represents something else, and literal events, right? And we have to figure out which is which. So let's go into a summary of the first six of the seven seals. So let's talk about the first four seals, right? A summary of the first four seals. Now, one of the things that we want to note as we study the prophecy is that a prophecy which you are now very familiar with, and you are very good experts at this, is that a prophecy spans from the time of the prophet John to the end of time. No surprises here, because we saw that with Daniel. In the case of Daniel, the prophecy spanned from Babylon to the end of time, when Christ came as a big stone that filled the whole earth. Babylon was the kingdom that existed during John's time. Is that okay? During Daniel's time, sorry. So it is no secret that as we study Revelation, we are studying prophecy from John's time, the prophet, all the way down to the end of time. So far, so good. We're planting a stake on that. From a historicist, which is what we have been using, and a lot of you understand that. Some of you in your responses to me, you were quoting very eloquently about the historicist method, and I felt very good about that because I don't have to spend a lot of time explaining. By now, you understand that fully. So, from a historicist perspective, some aspects of the prophecy were fulfilled in the past, and the rest is being and will be fulfilled. All right? The other thing we establish is that there is a healthy use of recapitulation. If that sounds like too big a word, just think about it as repeating. The Bible seems to be repeating itself over and over again. It recapitulates, it goes over some of the same time periods over and over again, but with a different magnification along the way. So, in the case of the messages to the seven churches, we had an overview. But when we get to the seals, we have a similar overview, but some more details are given. And I dare say that when we get to the trumpets, we'll have a similar recapitulation, but again with emphasis on certain parts of the history from John's time, which is the first bullet, down to the end of time, just to emphasize certain things. Everybody okay with that? The same historical period is being covered in the recapitulation. We are moving from John's time to the end of time, and I will come back to some slides on that. Everybody okay with that? Now remember that we are, if you will, summarizing the first four seals. So as we summarize the first four seals, I wanted to go back to some of the history that we covered in these lessons, both in Daniel and earlier when we started Revelation. The first thing we want to establish is that between AD 34, AD 34 was when Stephen was stoned, and therefore the message no longer was given primarily to the Jews, but the apostles with the stone of Stephen, which clearly said the Romans were now out to get the Jewish leadership of the church. Paul recognized that Rome was a big place. There were plenty roads and stuff. There was a peace called Pax Romana that allowed people to travel freely. And so Paul began his missionary journeys to the Gentile world. And we have the records of that in the epistles that form the New Testament: Philippians, Galatians, Corinthians, Romans, etc. All right, during that period, the church grew with real speed and haste. There were some persecutions during this period, yes, but it wasn't as systematic as in the later periods. So in this period, the church is really, as it were, a white horse. It is moving forward to conquer and to conquer. It is doing extremely well. And so we could summarize that to say Pax Romana, which is the Roman peace, a period of Roman peace. It allowed the church to grow, and the church grew from strength to strength after Christ's death and resurrection. Yes, there were periods, let us not dismiss the fact that there were periods of sporadic persecution during this period, but by and large, it wasn't as systematic as occurred in the late 3rd century when it really picked up some tempo, if you will, right? But by and large, Christianity was blossoming, it was gaining prominence, and so it is rightly represented, if you will, as a white horse going forth to conquer. He has a bow in his hand, which is a sign of warfare and going forth to conquer. And he has a crown on his head, which is signifying that it is indeed the church victorious. Everybody okay with this? This is bread and butter for us, right? So right after Christ's death, the church grew. As a matter of fact, Paul in the New Testament talks about the fact that Christianity was now all over the world. Is the devil happy about this? I hate sometimes to just give the devil prominence, but it's important to understand that the Lucifer, the devil, is never happy if the church is growing like this. So in order to stymie, and therefore you need to see the counterplot and plot taking place. In order to stymie, and this is the same Lucifer who, when Jesus's ministry was blossoming, decided to stop Jesus's ministry by crucifying him and putting him on the cross. Is that okay? So the same tactic is now going to happen where he decides that, listen, this church is going too well and prospering too much. And so at the end of the third century, moving into the fourth century, the church is going to experience focus and deliberate persecution of Christians who are under the premise, if you will, that they are refusing to blend in and they are not giving worship to the emperor, quite rightly, because they know that the Bible doesn't give sanction, if you will, to us elevating any man to be as high as God, etc. So during this period, the devil has shifted, if you will, his strategy from one of accommodation of the Christian church as it grew, and maybe that was not his 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 um his own ability to stop. In other words, God first made sure his church prospered, and then as persecution came, God allowed, if you will, the persecution of the devil to continue, and all of this became very systematic, very deliberate, very focused from the Roman regime, and a lot of blood was spilled, if you will, and to a large extent one could say that during this period the church is, if you will, the predominant concept that the church is facing is persecution and spilled blood. In the previous section, the predominant concept of the church is growth, conquering, spreading of the gospel. By the time we get to the third and fourth century, we are encountering deliberate, systematic, organized persecution that only comes to an end in 313 when Constantine, the Roman emperor, is converted to Christianity. I told you that we have to view Constantine with two lenses, because in one sense, he brought an end to the persecution and he elevated the Christian church to prominence. But as we'll discover in the next slide, he also brought the church into disrepute, if I could use that word. All right, so clearly, the more predominant concept, which is represented by the red horse in the second seal, is with a sword taking away the peace of the earth, etc., is the persecution aspect of the church. The church is being persecuted and it's experiencing real drama going forward. Keep your eyes on the screen. We try to pick up all this stuff, right? So in the third instance, which really goes from the early 4th century all the way to the 6th century, 538 AD, what we have now is a scenario where the devil is regrouping, because even under persecution, the church continues to strive. People are protected. Some people, yes, lose their lives and are burned to the stake, etc. But the church continues to grow. And then lo and behold, Constantine comes and he elevates the church to significant superiority. Now, the thing is that once that happens, what we then find is that the devil has a new methodology. He believes that maybe what he should do is to start to mix the thinking of the church with false thinking. And that way, if he is able to corrupt the belief system, then he doesn't have to worry about persecuting the church and spilling blood, because the church will now believe stuff that is not biblical. Everybody okay with that? And there's a master plan by the arch enemy, the general. So what happens is that there's growth of Christianity under successive emperors. But however, there is a significant adoption and integration of pagan beliefs and practices into the church, to the extent that true believers, those who say we will only follow what the Bible preaches, they are ostracized. Everybody okay with that? That is phenomenal. It is an important change of direction and a change of tactic, because rather than spending all this effort to persecute, he simply says, you say if he can't beat them, he'll join them. Well, he joins them. He joins them in abundance, because under this period, the church is expanding by leaps and bounds, because a lot of the pagan and the barbarian tribes who practice pagan worship, they find comfort in the church, because the church is accepting all of their beliefs about life after death, about worship of the sun, about different aspects of religion that have no genesis in the Bible. And so they feel a lot more comfortable in this church. And if the white horse represented the church believing in the Bible, then in the third seal, the church is represented as a black horse, and it is also holding its hand a pair of balances to suggest that the word of God, food and grain, is scarce. All right. Yes, there were famines and there was the plague of death during this period, but by and large, the concept here is that the church is represented as a church that is, to a large extent, the polar opposite of the early church, and that it is a church that is now corrupted in its theology and its teachings, and it is not doing what God wants. Remember, however, that I said to you that during this time, true believers are ostracized. So they are running into caves, they are going into tunnels, they are living in the rural areas, etc. But there is a sense of resentment that begins to build against these believers because they are seeming to be in opposition to the what is then seen as the official Christian church, because the Christian church is now the official church of Rome. So this is a big change that is taking place here, and it's a fundamental change. So as a result, as we move into the next period, the church begins another period of systematic destruction and persecution of these true believers. And so it is called the Dark Ages period because it is the height of prominence of false teaching, but also the height of destruction of God's people. All right. So what characterizes this period? Well, in this period, by 538, the leader of the church, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, has acquired civil powers and not just religious powers. So we begin to see a uniting of church and state, if you will. And as a result of that, everyone is now asked to follow the dictates of the Roman civilization in the West, anyway, led by the Bishop of Rome. Over time, as I told you, around this period, around 500, we would have had the rise of Islam. And so as a result, the church found itself in a lot of, and the Roman nation, if you will, found itself in a lot of wars and battles defending the imperialism of the Islamic hordes coming from the east. And so the Islamic nations, Saudi Arabia and others, are attempting, if you will, to convert and to dominate the nations to the west of them. And so there is this political and civil battle between the religious Christians and the religious Muslims, if you will. And there are the many crusades. So that the Roman Empire is giving over a lot of its rule, if you will, and influence to the church because it sees itself as cast in a fight against a rising religion that is heathen and against what they believe. Everybody okay with that? That's a straight historical summary I just gave there. But in addition to fighting the Crusades, the Roman nation and the church also organized itself, and we have persecution of the true believers, and a lot of Christians lose their lives during this period known as the Dark Ages. So the fourth seal, um, the church is represented as a pale church. It is no longer preaching good gospel. Death and Hades follow it. There's a lot of death. People are cast into hell. It seems as if the devil himself is running the church. That is how God sees the Christian church during this period, because the church is now characterized by false doctrine, but it is also characterized with a sense of persecution to the extent that true believers are suffering. All right. So again, that's just a quick summary, and it's summarized here for us. In the first seal, we saw the white horse. He has a bow, he has a crown. In the second seal, we saw the red horse. Took away peace from the earth. He has a great seal. People are persecuted. The black horse, there is a pair of scales in his hand. He has direction on food and price, but really it is signaling that God's word is scarce. And then the pale horse is a period of power, where people are killed, etc., thrown to the beasts of the earth, etc. Everybody okay with the first four seals? No rocket science. We all remember this from what we have studied so far. A lot of people have died, however. A lot of people have died. A lot of good Christians have died. Yes, some good Christians were preserved, while the Nazis and Huss and others, they were preserved and they continue to carry the gospel. And after 1798, God's word blossomed. But a lot of good people died. And so, quite rightly, the fifth seal ushers in, if you will, um, let's just read it. I thought I should put the text back up so that you understand. Today, I want to use the Bible a lot as much as I can. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them. He's seeing this in vision. Remember, you have to distinguish between real and symbolic language. So this clearly, once he sees souls below the altar crying out, this is symbolic because we know that the dead knoweth nothing and they are sleeping. Jesus himself reinforced that when they asked him about Jairus' daughter. He says she's asleep. The dead are asleep. They don't know anything. So we're not suggesting there's life after death. So when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar. The altar is in the Old Testament times when the lamb and the sacrifice was slain, the blood was poured at the feet of the altar. So John is evoking, if you will, that imagery which the Jews are very much familiar with. So he's saying that when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar. From the time he says under the altar, the Jews in the congregation know that in their traditional Jewish practice, under the altar used to be the blood of the sacrifice. So he's saying the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, they were sacrificed and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell upon the earth? Just to reinforce what I said to you, that this is metaphorical. Remember that when Cain killed Abel, God came to Cain and he said, What have you done? And then he says, Your brother's blood, Abel's blood, crieth out to me for vengeance. Was Abel alive when he was killed by Cain? No, he was dead. But his death, if you will, the 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 um the the gruesomeness of his death cried out for justice. We use that term, a figure of speech, all the time. We say that these children or these innocent children were killed. And therefore, people last week were concerned about children who were deported and coming back. And some of them said that these children are crying out for justice. It wasn't the children themselves, but it was suggesting that the whole event, if you will, evokes a cry of justice. So what does God respond in this philosophical language here? What does he say? Verse 11 says, And white robes were given unto every one of them. White robes represents the righteousness of Jesus Christ. We know that from parables. We know Jesus talking about that. And it was said to them that they should rest yet for a little season. In other words, I'm hear you about this need for you to be avenged for having been made a sacrifice by the Christian church that we just studied, but is now practicing systematic persecution and tribulation. But God is saying, rest a while. Why do they need to rest a while? Until your fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. In other words, God is saying to them, there is some more sacrifice and people who will die down the road, even beyond your time. And so I need to deal with the full extent of the period of history. So rest a while. In other words, it is not going to happen immediately that God will deal with that. Is that all right? So we talk about the blood. Those martyrs were considered worthy and are sure that God hadn't forgotten them. They must wait for some time until every case has been deliberated and Christ comes again to give everyone according to that word. At that moment, they will be resurrected and they will join their fellow servants and their brethren. Everybody okay with this? God promises to raise us from the dead so that we know that that time will come. All right. Still reviewing it. Let's get to the sixth seal. When we got to the sixth seal, we made a very clear understanding that we were moving, if you will, just from the literary language and the context of the writing, because it is not clear, but clearly from just the using literature and our ability to interpret, we can infer, if you will, that we are now at a stage where we are describing some real events. What are these real events? Well, the first thing is to appreciate that the sixth seal is made up of two parts. There's a first part that involves events in the sun, moon, and stars before the actual coming of Christ. And then there's a second part from verses 14 to 17 that deals with cataclysmic events, meaning a whole set of things that are happening almost at the same time and seem to be happening simultaneously that are occurring as Christ comes. Now, one of the things I didn't say to you last week, but I want to say today, is that on the basis of that, let me just change the color of something I'm using here. On the basis of that, you and I are living here. We are living, you and I, we are living between the first seal. Everybody okay with that? I'm making a mark on the screen here so you can see it. We are living between the first part of the sixth seal and the second part. The second part has not happened as yet. And we are alive inside of here. Maybe you need to keep that in your minds when you are tempted to think that God taking long to come and that so long you're hearing about Jesus coming. It's good to recognize that as far as the sixth seal is concerned, which was just a few chapters in chapter 6, a few verses in chapter 6, the first part has already happened, and we are living in this blue area here. We are living in this peace where we are waiting for Christ to come and the cataclysmic events are about to take place. All right, so I could just remind you of that. And again, if we just quickly run through the slides, we know that we talked about an earthquake, an eclipse of the sun, an eclipse of the moon, and then we talked about a meteorite shower. Those are the first part, and they occurred in the early 17th century to the late 18th century to the early 19th century, right? 1833 was when we had the meteorite shower that occurred that looked like it was really happening across the whole world. So there's now a lull, and we are waiting for this to happen. Verse 14 says, "And heavens departed as a scroll, when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places." This is cataclysmic. This is earth shattering. This is everything changing. "And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men," anybody who's anybody, "and every bondsman and freeman hid themselves in the dens and the rocks and the mountains." In other words, John is describing some literal events, and he's suggesting that when Christ comes, it will be so horrific that people want to run and hide, right? And they'll be saying to the rocks and the mountains, fall on us, and hide us from the face of the Lord. And then John is in the vision, he is either hearing or himself is asking a rhetorical question for the great, well, maybe the people themselves are saying this, for the great day of his wrath is come. Remember that word wrath, please. I want you to keep that in your mind. Remember that word wrath. The great day of his wrath, it seemed as if God is angry, the way the earth is being mashed up and destroyed, right? The great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? It is in answer to this question, who shall be able to stand, that we have an interlude that occurs in Revelation chapter 7. That is extremely important, and I want you to keep that in your minds going forward. All right? So let's go back. Let's continue the slides. This we covered already, and we can finish that. So I'm finished with this? Everybody okay so far? Let me go back, sorry. Why did it do me that? Right, so everybody okay so far? Any questions? You all okay? All right, so I want to get to some little bit details, right? Because I want us to appreciate what is happening in Revelation chapter 7. So let's make a detour, if you will, to Revelation chapter 7. For that, I want us to use the screen, if you will, and we will start here, right? So this is the question. I hope you're seeing that. Oh, I still have that birthday message running. Let me see if I can. I think they all got that message now, so I can take it off. Right. We wish them happy birthday. Right. So this is the let me just get ready, right? So the question that we are trying to answer is this question. For the great day of the wrath is come, his wrath, meaning God's wrath, his wrath is come, and who will be able to stand? Everybody okay with that? How does the Bible answer that? Because I want the Bible to explain that itself. So it says, verse 1 says, and after these things, I saw four angels. So he sees these seals and these visions, but that question is lingering. So it's as if he's getting an answer. I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding back the four what? Winds. Know the plural here. The four winds of the earth. And that the wind, know the singular here, should not blow upon the earth, nor on the sea, nor any tree. Everybody okay with this? No, this is straight Bible, right? I'm not making this up. A few things I wanted to appreciate. We know that when we talk four corners of the earth and the four winds, we're really talking about east, west, north, and south, right? That doesn't look like a, well, I can't write too well with a mouse. But anyway, that is for what is wood, east, west, north, and south. So really, whenever John uses that term, or at least in the context of this writing, when he uses this term, the four corners of the earth, he is really suggesting that it seems as if he is experiencing a situation where there is a calamity about to come upon the earth. Maybe the wrath of God, right? About to blow upon the earth. But angels who are representative of whom? God. Angels are holding back the four winds of the earth. They're giving it some time before it's ready to come, but they're holding back. And they're holding back the four winds, plural, to suggest that they're holding back the whole earth. But what they are really preventing is that the wind, I think this singular and plural is deliberate, because this wind is reflective and metaphorical and symbolic of a period of strife that will come upon the earth. Is that okay? Everybody all right with that? I'm using the Bible today because I want the Bible to speak to us, right? And we'll come back to our slides pretty quickly. Let's just run through this chapter very quickly because I don't want you to lose what we're trying to establish. He then says, I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. So the angel is holding the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, who are the ones we saw in the previous chapter, to whom was given to hurt the earth and the sea. A few things here before we go on to what he said. An angel who could command other angels has to be a representative angel of God, the archangel. All right. So he cried a loud voice, and he is having the seal of the living God. That's an interesting phrase, because the seal of the living God is Jesus Christ. And the seal of God, I dare say, is the Holy Spirit and his character. Paul told us that um, about the Holy Spirit sealing us and becoming his own. And therefore, God expects us to have his character. All right. How we live when we have his character is another issue we'll deal with as we move along. But I want you to appreciate that while the four angels seem to be holding back the four winds of the earth all around the earth, they're holding back the winds, meaning they are the four corners of the earth and they're completely around the earth. They want to stop a wind from blowing, a period of strife. So we need to ask ourselves, when is that period of strife? But another angel comes back and says to them, hold on still, right? So let's go to what he says. I cannot cheat you there. Let me go to what he says. He's saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea. In other words, don't touch any part of the earth, nor the trees. That is how fulfill and complete the description is. Until we, I wanted to deal with that because I want you to not miss anything here. Until we. Whenever we use our word we, let us make man in our own image and likeness. Let us. When we hear that we, that thing, we start to think about the fact that God is in his Trinity and he's operating in a certain way, right? So here is until we have sealed the servants, because the angel is walking with the seal of God in their foreheads. I told you the King James Version used in their foreheads, right? So it clearly suggesting that before this wind blows, before this period of strife and tribulation blows, it seems as if God is delaying the period when that will be allowed and allowed to happen because he wants to do something to his servants. And that something is to seal us in our foreheads. Our foreheads is our seat of thinking and our sense of who we are. So that is where our mind sits. Our heart only pumps blood, but our conscience, everything is in our mind. So when I am sealed with our God in my forehead, I'm really sealed with the character and the love of Jesus Christ. And we quote some text on that last week. I'll come back to that, or you can check it out in the previous sessions, right? So everybody okay so far? We have a picture, if you will. John has gone into interlude mode, and in interlude mode, he is getting an answer to this question. But before the question is answered, he's saying that before you bring, and by the way, before you bring the wind upon the earth, it seems to be that God intends to seal his servants in their foreheads who are upon the earth. That's a logical conclusion. Because the wind of strife is going to blow upon the earth. These people of God are on the earth, and God is going to seal them with his character on the earth. Keep that in your mind. That is a big. So again, this is extremely important. So having seen all of that, he says, I heard the number of them which were sealed. Let me just clear my drawing so you don't get confused, right? I heard the number of them which were sealed, and they were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. Everybody okay with that? So John is in a scenario where he witnessed the very end. Revelation 6:14 to 17, cataclysmic events. The Christ is coming, the place mashing up, rocks are falling, people are bawling, and then he hears the rhetorical question, who is able to stand? He has that question too, because this thing looks so dread and so drastic that the question is, who could stand up to this thing? And God gives him an answer. And he's saying that most likely the ones who are able to stand up to this are those who he has sealed. So God is saying, if in truth and in fact, you think about those cataclysmic events as being the end of a period of tribulation, or of that wind that is about to blow. God has released the angels and they blow in the wind. He's saying that before that happens, I'm going to seal my servants. I want to be a servant of God. I hope you are. Servants of God in our foreheads. In other words, we will now adopt the character and the behavior of Jesus Christ. There are other things we'll deal with when we get down to the other chapters, but just keep this now and hold on to it. And then he gives a number. He says, I heard that the number of them who are sealed is 144,000. Fundamental question here is that clearly we enter a significant mix because we are describing some literal events, but there is some metaphorical language creeping in. And the question therefore comes up, is this 144,000, is it real or is it a representative number? Note as well, it says of all the tribes of the children of Israel. And then he goes on, quite rightly, so I want to just run through that because you all know that. And he gives a listing of the tribes, right? The tribe of Judah was sealed 12,000. Tribe of Reuben, 12,000. 12,000. Of Gad, 12,000. Of Asher, 12,000. Naphtali, what you know as Naphtali, 12,000. Manasseh was sealed another 12,000. Simeon was sealed 12,000. Levi, and of the tribe of Issachar was sealed 12,000. Everybody okay with that? That's verse 7. Then he went on to Zebulun, and then he went on to talk about the tribe of Joseph, and the tribe of Benjamin was sealed 12,000. Now, a few things. I'm staying with the Bible. I'll go back to the slides in a little bit. But I want to talk this through because I wanted to see it. Because I think that is what leading to some of the confusion that you haven't made the connection. Now, there's something about this that opens up our minds. We are tempted to believe that this is a literal list of the tribes of Israel. But I produced a slide for you last week. So this time I go back to my slides and I try to find a slide that I had used to you. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Yes. Right, I produced a slide for you last week, and I told you that this listing here, these lists are far different, if you will, from how they are replicated in other areas. In Genesis, this is the 12 tribes. In Ezekiel, this is the 12 tribes listed. And in Revelation, this is the 12 tribes. We are missing Dan, and we are missing Ephraim. So some Bible commentators have said, who make an argument that this is that only all literal Jews will be saved, make an argument that this is deliberate because Dan and Ephraim eventually were idolatry worshippers, some of their descendants, and therefore you can't have idolatry worshippers or idolatry in heaven, so they're out. But there's another detailed argument that says, for instance, Maxwell makes it, and God cares too, that Ephraim, this group here, is numbered as a group of salvation by Ezekiel. So it's difficult to see that one minute they could be a saved group and then they're no longer a saved group. So it creates a high degree of confusion. So the question, therefore, is, should we consider this 144,000, should we consider it to be literal Jews or figurative Jews? So maybe the Bible can help us. Look what Paul, my good friend, who I love to read. This is what Paul says. And I'll give you a few texts today just for those of you who like to write down and research. You could go back and check. And I'll tell you why I do not accept the fact that the 144,000 is literal Israel. Because, you know, and just historically, before you can get into the text, historically, it is a real challenge to find a pure Jew today, because the Jews were so much scattered throughout history that even after they became a nation in 1948, as a result of World War II and the United Nations granting them a home in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem today, there was a significant amount of intermarriage. So that if you really talk about pure Jews, you're really in a whole different conversation altogether. So it is phenomenal to think that a God who says that gave his only begotten son, that whosoever should believe it in him shall not perish, is suggesting that when we get to the end of time, he will only seal Jews, when in truth and in fact, he had said, whosoever believe, Jesus himself said that, should not perish but have everlasting life. And look what Paul says, because Paul is maybe our most powerful preacher around this. Paul says in Romans chapter 2, verse 28, for he is neither Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward of the flesh. In other words, the Jews used to think that because they had a certain look and because they were circumcised, they were Jews. And Paul is saying, no, 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 you're not a Jew because of how you look or how you were born or what your heritage is, or because you have circumcised. You are really a Jew. This is how he answers it. He says, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly. I love that because it means that anybody could be a Jew. And today I want to say that I am a Jew because inwardly, I am a child of God, right? Inwardly, and circumcision is of the heart. In other words, if you really want to feel you need to be circumcised, circumcise your heart. Allow your heart to reflect the fact that you are a follower of Christ. In the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not in men, but in God. I like that, right? So Paul is making a powerful argument. Look what he says in Galatians. In Galatians, so let me just clear all those marks I left on the screen, right? In Galatians chapter 3, verse 26, he says, for ye are not all the children of God by faith, for ye are all, sorry, my mistake about that not. For you are all the children of God by faith in Jesus Christ, right? And then he says, for as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Everybody okay with that? Everybody okay with that? And then look what Paul says in Philippians. I've just given you these so you could keep that in your mind, and then when you go over the lesson during the week, you could go back and look at them. He said, finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. He is greeting the church at Philippi, right? To write the same things to you, to me, indeed is not grievous, but for you it is safe. This is his greetings to the church. And then he goes on and he says in verse 3, for we are the circumcision, which worship God in the spirit. He's talking to the church at Philippi. This is a Gentile nation. This is not a Jewish nation. And he's referring to them as being circumcised. Why? And rejoice in Jesus Christ and have no confidence in the flesh. In other words, he's saying their circumcision is a spiritual circumcision. In other words, it's an identification that comes from being in Jesus Christ. I'm really, really enthusiastic about this because I want to debunk this view that you're looking for actual Jews. Verse 4 says, though I might also have confidence in the flesh. If any man thinketh he had, wherefore he might trust in the flesh, I more. In other words, Paul is saying if anybody could have had confidence in the flesh, is me. Why? Because he was circumcised on the 8th day. He's of the stock of Israel. He's of the tribe of Benjamin. He's a Hebrew of Hebrews, as touching the law, and he's a Pharisee. Paul is saying, these are all my worldly qualifications. Concerning zeal, persecuting the church, remember Paul persecuted the church, touching the righteousness, which is the law, blameless. That was the man he was. But he says, but what things were of gain to me, meaning all those things that I thought were of gain to me, I count as loss for Christ. In other words, for Christ, that doesn't mean nothing. All right? I find that you should go back and just keep reading that until it's stick in your head. He say, yeah, doubtless, I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung. You know what dung is, right? We talk about cow dung. Paul is being very, very dramatic in his writings. That's why I love him so much. That I may win Jesus Christ. He's saying all these things that you thought are so important are not important about being born a Jew, about being Hebrew. What is important is being spiritual for Jesus Christ. Everybody okay with that? So the question then is, who are these 124,000? Well, I gave you a hint a while ago, in that I went back to John 3:16, and God says, whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And then what does Jesus say to his disciples as he's leaving the earth? Matthew 28. Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and preach and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, the Trinity God, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the earth, on the world. What he says, go and teach all nations. Did he say go and teach Jews? No, he says go and teach all nations. So clearly, God has an expectation, if you will, that his gospel will go to all nations. Paul is then telling us that when we accept Jesus Christ, we become spiritual Jews because we no longer are of Abraham's descent, but really we are of Jesus's descent, and we are spiritual Jews as opposed to physical Jews. Everybody okay with that? Now the question then is, I also want to remind you of what we know from Paul in Thessalonians. So again, here on the screen, I'm using the Bible today because I want to clarify some stuff. He says, but I would not have you ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep. You sorrow not even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so also them which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of God, that we which are alive and remaining unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. In other words, Paul anticipated that there would be some Christians who would be alive when Christ is going to come. Who would be alive when Christ is going to come? Who will be alive when Christ is going to come? Paul anticipated that there would be Christians who would be alive when Christ is about to come. When Christ comes, there will be the cataclysmic events of the sixth seal. Heavens roll back as a scroll. Mountains start to fall upon people. They shall fall upon them and die. And the question is asked, who shall be able to stand? And then he says, I saw those that were sealed to be 144,000. So clearly, I want to make that connection now before I miss it. God is saying to us that those who will be alive and remain until the coming of the Lord would be sealed by God and ready for him. And I suggest to you that a 144,000 would be alive and present on the earth when Christ comes a second time. Are we okay with that? I want to make that conclusion. Now, don't if it didn't stick, I'll come in to clear it up for you a little bit again, right? Because he then went on to say, for the Lord himself shall descend with a shout, with the voice of an archangel and the trump of God, and those who are dead shall rise first. And then he says, then we which are alive and remain, keep saying that, because Paul believed that Christ would have come in his lifetime. Well, he didn't come in his lifetime, but he's saying that he saw himself. There's the same man who just said he is not a Jew by heritage, but he's a Jew by spirit and by coming to Jesus Christ. And he's the same man who knows that Jesus said in the scripture, whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. The same Jesus who told the disciples, go into all nations. The four angels and the four winds of the earth suggest the entire earth. So God is saying that before he comes, there will be a group of Christians who have accepted him, who are sealed with his character, who have his spirit, and who will be alive when he comes. And they will be caught up in heaven together with those who are raised from the dead, who have died in Christ. And so we'll meet with our Lord forever. But you all right with that? But you all right with that? Do I need to do more? Let's go back to our text. Because I want to get back to my slides, but I want to just finish the chapter because I want to make sure we understand. So let's go to verse 9. Because in verse 8, all we are told is that we are talking about the tribe of Benjamin, etc. Right now, let me just summarize this very clearly. Yeah? The 144,000 that he heard was sealed. He's saying that this is a group who will be alive on earth when Christ comes, the cataclysmic events of the sixth seal, heavens rolling up, mountains falling, people hiding, but this group is alive. So they are during that period. But remember, if God protected John on the Isles of Patmos, God is able to protect his believers. All right. The other thing maybe I should just remind you of quickly, which we discussed. Let me see if I find that group of text to you. I like to go to Numbers. Numbers chapter 31, verse 1 to 6. Quickly it says, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites. Afterwards shalt thou be gathered unto thy people. And Moses spake unto the people, saying, arm some of yourselves unto war, and let them go against the Midianites, and avenge the Lord of the Midianites. The Midianites were an opposing nation to Israel, and they attempted to persecute and destroy and exterminate Israel. But God gave instructions to Moses to go to battle against the Midianites, even as the Midianites are trying to destroy Israel. Keep that Old Testament scene in your mind. So how does God organize them for battle? He says, of every tribe, take 1,000 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and he shall stand to war. So they were delivered out of the thousands of Israel, out of the whole set of Israel, 1,000 of every tribe, 12,000 armed for war. 12,000 Israelites is symbolic, is representative of God's people getting ready for war against the Midianites. So I would say to you that 12,000 is a more intensified battle. It's a deeper, stronger battle. It's a battle against maybe a different kind of Midianite, a Midianite of the last day who wants to destroy God's people. But God has gathered his people together and he's ready to go to battle. And Moses sent them out to war, 1,000 of every tribe, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, to the war, and the holy instruments and the trumpets blew in their hand. All right. At the end of it, they were successful. All right. So I want to, having said that, let's go back to Revelation. I see a question, so I'm going to come to that now. Um, right. So let me just take that one question. So the question is, are you saying that it is only 144,000 out of the people on earth who shall be taken to heaven? And I can tell you for now, no, that is not what I'm saying. By going back to that reference to Moses, I'm saying to you that I am not accepting that the 144,000, there are two things I'm not accepting about the 144,000. The first is that I am not accepting it is only Jewish people, because this list of the tribes is inconsistent with the list of the tribes in Ezekiel and in Dan and in Genesis and other parts of the Bible. So it is clearly not meant to represent literal Jews. I'm also saying that on the basis of what Paul has said and Jesus has said, that we can understand that in God's mind, as we get to the end of time, as we are now, a Jew is anybody who accepts Jesus Christ. So a Jew is not about heritage. It's not about what blood flows in you or what is your genetics. A Jew is about your spirituality. So I'm accepting and I'm saying it very clearly that this is not real, actual, literal Jewish people. The other point I want to make by going back to that text in Numbers is to say to you that in assembling 12,000 people to represent Israel and to go to war, God effectively was saying that all of Israel was going to war. I'm saying to you that 144,000 then is symbolic of an intensified period where God has all of the saints who come to him in the last days from all around the world. And that group of saints, which is more than a literal 100, it is inconsistent that my great God will have only exactly 144,000 people who are alive on the earth to go into heaven. So clearly this number is symbolic. And the only symbol it could represent is a completeness of the world, and the fact that when Israel had 12,000 going to war against the Midianites, they were successful. If you had 12 times 12,000 going to war against the wicked people at the end of time, then God is promising an assurance. Remember, this section here is attempting to answer the question, who shall be able to stand? God is saying, all the people of the world, all nations, kindred, tongue, and people who accept me and are alive when I come and are sealed with my character and my Holy Spirit, these are the people who are able to stand. They are not running to rocks and mountains. They are not being covered. They're remaining faithful to God. Okay? What if God has a special duty for the 144,000? That is a good question, and we'll answer that in a few minutes now, right? So those are two questions. So I want to be clear in answer to the first question. No, I am not saying that these are literal Jews, and I am not saying that this is a literal number. I'm saying that the use of the tribes is to suggest all of Israel, meaning all of spiritual Israel who comes to God, and that could be the Chinese man who accepts Jesus Christ, the African man who accepts Jesus Christ, the Caucasian, the Indian, the whoever. Once we accept Jesus Christ and we are governed by his Holy Spirit, we are now spiritual Jews. Is that okay? And if we are spiritual Jews, then God is willing to assemble us and gather us together. And I'm saying to you that the 144,000 is also not literal, because for it to be literal will be inconsistent with Jesus's own pronouncements, where he said, whosoever should come into the earth. But rather, it is reminding us, because I told you that Revelation uses a lot from the Old Testament. It is reminding us that when God goes to war with forces that surround Israel to take them down, he went with 12,000. So if he intensifies that number in the end of time by saying 12 times 12,000, which is not unique. When the disciples say, how often should we forgive our brothers? 7. He says 70 times 7. Remember that? Because he was saying to them, while 7 looks like a complete number, you should go beyond that. In this case, God is signaling to us that at the end of time, just before his cataclysmic events of the sixth seal second part take place, there will be a group of people who are without number, I would say, numberless, and I'll come to that now, who are numberless, who have accepted Christ, who have allowed him to become part of their lives, and they would be protected and saved and are able to stand during this climatic period because they have been sealed by God. So let's just keep that for a little bit and let's move on, right? What does verse 9 says? Verse 9 says, after this I beheld. What does beheld mean? Beheld mean he sees. He sees. Now in the previous verse of verse verse 4, I believe it is. Yes, verse 4. In the previous verse, he heard the number. That's why you be real careful about making this look as if it's a literal number, because John is hearing that the amount is sealed on John 44,000, because it is a good way to communicate to God-fearing Old Testament reader as John was, because he can quickly make reference to God using 12,000 to fight the Midianites. And so he begins to appreciate that this is God's church militant. If I could borrow some words, some Ellen G. White and some of her writings, this is God's church militant, getting ready for battle and going before the Lord. But when we get to verse 9, however, we're in a different space, because after this 144,000 that I heard about, I beheld, and lo, a great multitude. Note this. That means innumerable. He cannot count how much it is, which no man could number. Just in case you thought I didn't give you the right meaning of what innumerable means. Of all nations. Wow, all nations. Isn't that not saying anything about Jews anymore? And kindreds and people. There's an emphasis here, almost as if he is trying to explain what went before, right? So he says, after this I beheld a great multitude which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. Is that okay? Let me just go through the others, and I'll take a question that I'm seeing popping up. And cried with a loud voice. So these are the people who are part of the great multitude. They are crying with a loud voice, saying, salvation to our God which sitteth upon the throne. So where are these great multitudes? Where are they? Where are they? He's seen a great multitude which no man could number, and they are people who are standing before the throne, because God is seated upon the throne. You don't understand? Let's go on. And all the angels stood about the throne and about the elders and the four beasts, and fell before the throne on their faces and worshiped God. So the angels are worshiping God in the scene, all right? Saying, Amen. Blessed and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be unto our God forever and ever. The angels are praising God for a great victory. What is the victory? What is the victory they are praising God for? Well, it seems as if that group who were able to stand are now caught up, as we read in Thessalonians, are now in heaven, and they're standing before the throne. And when they're standing before the throne, what John sees is a great multitude of all kindreds, nations, tongues, and peoples that he cannot even number. He doesn't talk about, because he's seeing now. He's not hearing. He's seeing maybe the church victorious. I borrow from Ellen White again. So in the previous section, verses 1 to 8, he is hearing about the church in its militancy on earth, waiting to see the end of time. But in these verses, he's seeing the church now victorious into the heavenly kingdom. And one of the elders answered and said unto me, what are these which are arrayed in white robes, and whence came they? So an elder out of the 24 elders comes to John, and he says, who are these people? What are these people that you see arrayed? And John said, Sir, thou knowest. And he said unto me, these are they which came out of great tribulation. Now let me stop here and just put a clarification that I thought is done extremely well by Stephen Ball, but I could regurgitate it as best as I can. Stephen Ball says that the literal translation of that in the Greek, if you go back to its literal translation of that term that says great tribulation, it says the tribulation that was great. So that's the literal translation, because there's a reason for that. Some people, when they read this text, they assume it means all people throughout the ages who went through tribulation. But no, John is very specific. John is saying this is a group, this multitude that I cannot number, this multitude that stands before the throne of God, that is made up of every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. This multitude that stands before God, they have come out of the tribulation that was great, which reminds me of the wind that the angels are holding back. And it seems that when it is released, it causes real drama, and it culminates in the cataclysmic events of the second part of the sixth seal. Christ comes and the place is mashed up and burned up, etc. But this group have withstood that. We were just told that he heard the church being militant during that period. Clearly, the church has become triumphant and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb, which means that they are sealed with the behavior and the character of Jesus Christ. And it continues by saying, therefore they are before the throne of God. Somebody just asked me whether there's a special rule for the 144,000. Think about this. It says they are before the throne of God and they serve him night and day and night in his temple. And he that sitteth upon the throne shall dwell with them. They shall hunger no more. They shall thirst no more. The tribulation that was great, and neither shall the sun light on them. They shall not be burnt by the sun. A last day kind of phenomena which we talk about in the plagues, or any heat. All right. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them. He shall lead them unto living fountains of water, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There's another text I want to just get to you quickly before I go to your question. I don't think I've forgotten the person with the question. Look at what Revelation 14, 1 to 5 says, which is also mentioning, which is the only time 144,000 is mentioned again in the Bible, right? So here it says, verse 1 says, pay attention to this. This is really phenomenal. And you're at the point, of a huge revelation and an epiphany. I looked. He's not hearing. I looked. This is John having a view into heaven. And lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion. Forget that S, right? This representation is Zion. And with him, Mount Zion is in heaven. I looked in heaven and saw a lamb, capital M, which is Jesus, the Lamb of God, stood on the Mount Zion, and he had 144,000 having his father's name. What does that mean? Written in their foreheads. That is the seal of God. When we allow God's name to be used in their foreheads. So, all right. I'll see in questions. Let me just take them quickly in case I can answer any. All right, so somebody's asking on the Zoom platform, why is there a separation of the 144,000 to the great multitude? And that is a powerful question, and that's one we need to answer. So let me just come back to that, right? And then I have a question on YouTube that says, so verse 14 suggests believers will go through tribulation. And the answer to that is yes. Yes. And I suppose the verse 14 you're talking about is the verse 14 of Revelation. Let me just go back to that quickly. All right, so this is the verse 14 you're talking about, right? So verse 14 says, and I looked unto him, and he says, sit down, this is how come out of great. So the person on YouTube is asking, will believers go through tribulation? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. So that we're not being masochistic, we're not being sadistic and thinking that we must only see drama. But the reality is that the very author of Revelation was going through tribulation by being on the Isles of Patmos. So clearly there is a period of tribulation, and it seems to be that is what the wind that is being held back is all about. So that all of the earth will experience this tribulation, and it will come upon the earth, but it will be driven by the people of the earth, and it will be against the believers who are gathered militant in their groups of 12,000 times 12,000, which is reminding you of when Israel goes to war with the Midianites. So they are gathered against this militant foe that is coming again, which is great tribulation. But the fact of the matter is, they will emerge victorious. And I wanted to keep that in mind, right? So in Revelation 14:1, he says, they have their father's name written in their foreheads, the 144,000. So that's what he says about them, right? But he sees them, they stood on the Mount Zion, which is really in the temple of God. We just talked about the temple of God at the end of chapter 7. Verse 2 says, "And I heard a voice from heaven as a voice of many waters and the voice of a great thunder. And I heard a voice of harpers harping with their harps." So he's hearing some loud stuff going on in heaven. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne. Who is singing this song? The 144,000, because that is the first group that he sees in front of the throne. This is chapter 14 now. This is not chapter 17, right? So he's seeing that before the throne, and the song, as it were, a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000, which were redeemed from the earth. I hope that is clear. This is a group who were redeemed from the earth. These are they which are not defiled with women. And I told you that when he uses woman here, he's not talking about the female gender, but he's using woman in its very symbolic sense to represent false religion, which is something we'll deal with when we get to chapter 12. So that you notice this is from chapter 14. So that is already established where he's using woman to represent false religion. All right. This is not unique because God also uses an upright woman to represent his church. All right. For they are virgins, right? They have not corrupted themselves with anything. These are they which follow the Lamb. Somebody asked if there's any special rule for the 144,000. They follow the Lamb wheresoever he goeth, and these were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. First fruits for a farmer are the precious fruits that have withstood all the pestilence, and they now emerge as his best fruits. All right. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they went out for before the throne of God. Now, this one is powerful because we kind of feel that these are perfect people. They are not perfect people. Let me tell you, there's a text that we like to use here that we don't pay attention to. This is Paul in Ephesians. Paul says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for them." We like to stop there. Love to preach that in funerals and weddings, I mean. And at least say funerals, but I suppose for some people, it's like a funeral, right? Anyhow. Right, so that he might sanctify and cleanse it with a washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself, meaning the church, a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that it should be holy and without blemish. God's plan is to present humanity without spot, without blemish, without wrinkle. So when in Revelation 14:5 it says, "And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne," it's important to appreciate that what he is saying here is that the only reason they are found without guile is because they have given up of themselves and they have accepted Jesus and his righteousness. Everybody okay with that? So we seem to have a sequence occurring here. And I know time is running, but just give me a few minutes. I want to go to a slide that is really critical to our understanding at this point in time, which is really, and to the person who asks about why they are, if there's, why there's a separate group, I'm coming back to that, right? So don't. All right, so I wanna just, as I maybe have to take a close, I will stop in a bit. Let me just say something here quickly, right? Pay attention to this. This is a number line, right? A timeline. This is 80. This is BC, right? And this is 1,000 years BC. I didn't go all the way back, but let's just say 1,000 years BC. And this is everything 80. Keep in mind all that I said before. And I'll come to Jacqueline has a question about whether this is happening now, as opposed you're referring to the time of trouble and the tribulation period that the saints will come out of. And my answer to that is no. And we will come to that in another chapter, but it is clear that we haven't started that period as yet. I know you feel COVID feels like tribulation, but COVID is not tribulation. Pastor Roy this morning told us that is just the tip of the iceberg. So I want to say that the answer is no. But let's just follow the timeline for now. Let's anchor some things that we know. We know that Babylon came around in 605. This is a scale timeline. Yeah? So this is representing real time in a scale version, right? So if this is 1,000 years BC, then Babylon occurred around 605 BC. Everybody okay with that? And then Medo-Persia came around 539 BC. They were followed by Greece in 331. This is all revision for you good students who were with me since Daniel. And then Rome really began its advances in the closing part of the BC period, 168 BC. And then in AD 31, Christ is crucified. So we now into AD, right? This is all BC, but I'm getting the timeline in a certain way for you. And then in AD 34, Stephen is stoned. Everybody okay with that so far? Stay on the screen. It's really important. I want to just bring all of this home to you. And then in AD 70, Jerusalem is destroyed by Titus the general. In AD 100, Christianity is spreading. Right? There's around the time that John is in the Isles of Patmos and he's getting these visions and he's persecuted, etc. But Christianity is spreading in the period of the White Horse. In 313, Constantine is baptized and converted. And then in 538, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, gets civil power. 1517, is when Luther launches Protestantism. And then we have 1798, which is when the French Revolution came. And then 1844, which was the end of the 2300 days prophecy from Daniel. And then there's just to represent 2020, which is where we are today. Everybody okay with this? Just take it for what it is, right? I want to quickly move on, and I suspect I'll have to come back to do this again next week. So it seems to suggest that if we talk about the first part of the sixth seal, where the meteorite shower occurred in 1833, which is somewhere about here, then we are anxiously waiting for our next event, and our next event is that Jesus will come. Everybody okay with that? We don't know when it is. We don't know the date. So I'm not putting any dates here, but sometime after 2020, we are expecting Jesus to come. Stay with me. I'm building a case here. Let's go again. The other thing I want you to appreciate on this slide, if I went back to the original slide, is that the first four horsemen of the seventh seal, they are covering a period from around the beginning of the early century all the way down to 1798 when the church comes to an end, right? And that's a fair expectation. We have the first horse that was white, we have the second horse that was red when the church was being deliberately persecuted. We have the third horse where the church begins to adopt pagan beliefs, and then we have the fourth horse, which is a long period of tribulation known as the Dark Ages, from about 538 to then, right? And then we have the saints of God who were martyred on the fifth seal as represented during this period, crying out to God for vengeance. Everybody okay with that? Keep that in your mind. I'm building up a case. All this is stuff that we know. Let's go again. So we have, I'm breaking it into a further magnification, right? So we talked about the four horsemen. We talked about the fifth seal. This is where the events, pay attention to this part at the bottom here that I'm showing you. This is where the events of the first part of the sixth seal is taking place. 1833 is when 1833 is when we had the falling of the stars, right? The meteorite shower. So it then means that we are really waiting for something else to happen. What is that something else? Let's go. So it seems as if, let's just put here for some time period in the future where the events of the second part of the sixth seal will take place. And you know the events of the second part of the sixth seal. It is heaven declaring as a scroll, things mashing up, Christ coming, people running to the rocks and mountains, but the 144,000 are able to stand. I'm saying that because I'm going to show it. So consistent with these events, because it will first, and I know there's an exaggerated view here, but consistent with this is that the heavens start to peel back and stuff, and then Christ comes in the clouds, right? And then what we know, well, this came a little bit before I was ready to show it to me. Yeah, but anyway. So the other thing I want to say to you is that the 144,000, for all of those who ask the questions, I think this clarifies it. The 144,000 will be alive before these climatic events, some period here, and I could actually expand this section. Let me just do that. Right, so I'm expanding this section. So the 144,000, they are alive. And again, I put it in quotes here because I'm telling you I do not accept it is a literal 144,000. But they have the Father's name in their foreheads, which is what Revelation 14 tells us, right? So they are sealed. That's what sealing means, that they have the character of God. So God is sealing his people. Oh, by the way, God is sealing people all the time, eh? But there's a special end time sealing that is taking place because he wants to prepare his people for what is going to be a terrible time. All right. So he's sealing them with his character, and they are alive. They are serving God, but they are now facing the Midianites, which is the last day persecution. Somebody asked me, will they go through tribulation? Yes. So there's a period of tribulation, but they are alive, consistent with what we read in Thessalonians, where God is seeing them as alive before the throne, alive, sorry, on earth. They're still on earth, and they witness the climatic events. And while everybody is running to rocks and mountains, they are standing up. Is that okay? They are standing. As best as I can draw, standing, right? They are standing. They are standing because they are sealed with the character of God and are able to withstand any drama that comes their way. Everybody okay with that? So let's go back to my, oh yes, let me get out right. So this is where we are, right? We can take out that stand there. The other thing to note is that he sees, so this is what he heard, he sees what here? The great multitude. This is after Christ has come. He sees a great multitude in heaven. Everybody okay with this? Everybody okay with this? This is powerful in my view, because I'm trying to say to you that you have a sense, if you will, of the relationship, certainly in timing, between the 144,000 and the great multitude. Now, I know there's a question I have been asked as to why is there a separation between this 144,000 and the great multitude. So let me just say to you, which I did last week, but I'll say it again, that there are three approaches to understanding the 144,000 and the great multitude. The first approach is to assume that there are two separate groups. So that one is on the earth before Christ comes, and then this is another group in heaven. The other approach is to assume that they are one and the same. And the argument for that is that in one case, John hears about the 144,000 because they are representing the church militant going forward. But, and this what I'm saying here is well covered in the SDA Bible commentary, so I'm not speaking out of tune, right? Talking about these three understandings of the 144,000. So it is assumed that this is what he hears about, but when he ultimately sees them, they are of every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, representing all spiritual Jews, and they are unable to be numbered and stand before the throne of God. So that this is just the same group, viewed in a different way. And then the third approach to interpreting this is to say that the 144,000 are a special group of people who are alive when Christ comes, which is consistent with what we have said all the way, but that they are part of a larger multitude who include all the other saved who join before the court. Now, there's a difficulty with that last interpretation simply because the way the great multitude are described in Revelation, the 144,000 is described in Revelation 14, 1 to 5, it seems as if it is using the same language of Revelation 7, 9 to 17, when John describes the great multitude. So there's a strong view, if you will, that this represents the same. There is no conclusive evidence around either position, either the three positions. And so if that confused you last week, I accept that, but I want to say to you that I cannot say with any certainty that they are separate, they are the same, or one is a subset of the other. All I can tell you is that from what the Bible has described, is that the saints of God, people who have given their lives to God and allow his name and his character to come within them, they will be alive on earth. They will go through a period of tribulation, culminating in cataclysmic events before Christ comes, and that ultimately there will be a victorious group of people standing before the throne of God, because he would have redeemed them from the earth, first fruits of the earth, and brought them up into heaven. Let me see if I could just conclude with my closing slides. A little bit of more detail, but more or less the same thing. Just to give you that detail a little bit more, right? So I want you to just appreciate that. And then the last thing I just wanted to say to you is that if this is a number line, as indeed it is, and I went back to as far as 4000 BC, this time instead of 1000 BC. If this is a number line of Earth's history, as covered in the Bible, and 1844 is here, and 2000 is here, I want you to appreciate that if you think you have plenty of time, you don't. Because pretty soon, Christ is going to come. All right? And then the last part of this is the seventh seal. It says when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Now, as I answer that, I want to just go back to the Bible a little bit, because there's something that I really want to just establish with you. So let's look at Revelation 6, right? Let's go all the way to verse 15, and it says, and the kings of the earth, and the great men of the earth, and the rich men of the earth, the chief captains of the earth, and mighty men hid themselves in the rocks and the mountains, and said unto the mountains and the rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the rocks and the mountains, and sit upon the earth. For the great water of the Lord is come, and who will be able to stand? Now, if we didn't have chapter 7, which was an interlude, and we went straight to the seventh seal, the next thing we'd have been saying is that when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for the space of half an hour. So again, this one too has different interpretations. There are some who believe, yes, and our sister is giving me some advice, so that Great Controversy, the Great Controversy, which is an excellent read for anybody who wants to just understand the sequence that I just displayed. Page 665 gives an explanation of Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, right? Which is about the great multitude. And if you look at some of the writings of Ellen White in that book, Great Controversy, you have a sense. I told you there are three approaches to the great multitude and the 144,000. There's a sense, if you will, that she too treats them as the same. I can't say that definitively. I'm just saying there's a sense when you read some of the writings and you watch the way she juxtapose certain things, and she uses a language from both pieces in between that it seems to represent the same. But we will leave it as inconclusive for now. The other inconclusive thing I want to deal with is silence in heaven. So when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in the space half an hour. There are some, and I have done it in the past, who have used this using the year-day principle and come back to assume that a half an hour using the year-day principle where one day is equal to a year and a year is supposed to be 360 days in biblical reckoning, that this half an hour is equal to 7.5 days, which therefore means that there is a quietness in heaven for about a week. And the view is that it represents a time when heaven, everybody leaves heaven to come to earth and take us, those who are alive and those who have been resurrected, according to 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul, to go into heaven. And so there's quietness for a period, right? However, there's another view, because this has not been explained in the Bible, and so it's difficult for us to form it as a conclusion. There are those in the Bible, in the spiritual realm of commentators, who also say that this is really representing, if you will, a period where, as he deals with the this question of who the great wrath of God has come and who will be able to stand, there is a period of silence in heaven for a short time, a literal half an hour, where they're just waiting to see how this will play out because you have just opened the seventh seal. Is that okay? I'm just saying to you that that is two approaches to this. We have, and I have certainly preached in the past, that it represents the journey from heaven to earth and back, when everybody and there's singing in heaven afterwards when we get up to heaven. But there's also a very strong view that that might be a stretch because we haven't been given enough information to suggest that that is what it really is, and that what we're really dealing with, rightly and maybe so, is a period of pause in heaven, because this question of who will survive this onslaught and tribulation at the last period is one that needs to be answered. All right, so I want to conclude today by reminding you that at the end of the day, when all is said and done, this God that we serve, this God of heaven, he's still my savior and he's still my protector. If God could protect John on the Isles of Patmos, he can protect me during a period of tribulation to come, and he can carry me up into the earth made new. If I'm alive when Christ comes, I don't need to be worried. If I am dead in Christ, then my fate is sealed, and I look forward to the first resurrection. One way or the other, I am expected to be in heaven amongst the great multitude. If there's a special multitude who have been through tribulation and I didn't go through it, I'll still be among the saved in God's heavenly kingdom. Is that okay? But the idea is that God is preparing a place for us. I want to stop here. I've gone well over my time today, but I thought it important to just go through those charts because I think they give you a good sequence in your head of before and after. The 144,000 is the group spoken about before Christ comes. The great multitude is a group spoken about after Christ comes. The fundamental question is, are they one and the same? Are they two separate groups? Is one a subset of the other group? The important point to note is not about the numbers, but about the fact that God is able to save his people who keep his name in their foreheads. Is that okay? That's my cue to end today. We have AY as well in our church, so I don't want to, I know I've imposed on the time already, but I want to stop there today. Next week we get into the trumpets. But again, if you have a question, feel free to raise it. And if we need to cover at least just the slides with the sequence next week, we'll do that before we get into the trumpets. And by the way, you are not bothering me by asking questions. You are not holding back the class. We have no agenda with timetable here. There's nothing that says we must finish this by first quarter next year. We are just going and we'll finish when it's done. According to the song that the Americans like to say, it's not over till the fat lady sings. We will not stop until you are at a point where you are comfortable with what's presented. Because if you don't, this morning Pastor reminded us, if you can't run with the footmen, how will you run with the horsemen? Well, the fact is, if you can't grasp this little piece quick, we have we have deeper stuff coming, and I therefore want you to grasp this piece so you can be ready for when we get to the second point. Praise God. Thank you all. I think we've covered a lot today, and it's a lot to assimilate, but hopefully it's a lot clearer than what we did last week. All right. I saw some affirmative response in the YouTube. I haven't seen anything on the Zoom side, but I hope that some of you asked the questions, got your questions answered. And let's bow our heads for prayer as we close off today's session. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for your goodness and your grace. We thank you for whosoever believeth in you will not perish but have everlasting life. And that you are a God who is able to present me, a sinner, and all of us blameless before the throne of God. Not because of what we have done, but because of the power of your salvation and your blood that was spilled on our behalf, and the power of your Holy Spirit to implant your character in our minds and our being so that we can be the Christians you want us to be. We thank you for giving us this insight that people would be able to stand up on the day when you come in the clouds of glory, and that those people who are able to stand, you would protect during times of tribulation. Just as Moses assembled 12,000 to go to war against the Midianites, you have assembled and you will assemble your people to go to war against the powers of darkness and come out victorious. Help us to be numbered among the victorious, among the saved of heaven, so that we can be with you throughout the ceaseless ages of eternity. Bless us and guide us according to your will, is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen and amen.